Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to all those who are tuning in from the United Arab Emirates and around the world into this first session of this year's special festival celebrating the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I want to give a special thank you to the UAE Ministry of Culture and Youth for organizing these 4 days of performances, conversations, and explorations, all of which lead us back to the incredible and enduring gift that the Prophet, upon whom be peace, left not only us as believing Muslims, but actually left humanity. My name is Abdurrahman Malik. I'm a journalist. I'm an educator. I'm a cultural organizer. I'm speaking to you today from New Haven, Connecticut, which is the home of Yale University. I'm currently a lecturer at the Yale Divinity School, where I teach Islamic studies. But as some of you tuning in might know, I am also, I would say, not just a lover, but I think the proper word is ashik. I'm an ashik of coffee, a true lover of what I call the Muhammadan bean. And that terminology is going to become clear over the course of the next hour as myself and Sayyid Abdullah al-Mahiri, who I'll introduce in a moment, will be leading you, I hope, on an exploration of what makes coffee so special in terms of the Islamic tradition, Islamic history, Islamic social life, Islamic culture, and how this beverage, which was facilitated by lovers of the Prophet, quite literally, people of spirituality, people of prayer, that this drink, which started as a means to prayer, has now become the most popular beverage in the world, the most traded commodity after oil and petroleum. That's the power of coffee in the world today. Um, my own journey with coffee begins as a young boy. My parents are from the subcontinent. They're from Pakistan, and they came to Canada in the early 1970s, which is the place I grew up. And chai, shai, tea was the big thing that we drank in our house. But coffee was special. Why? Because coffee was something that we went out of the house to have. It was something very special that I and my parents on Sundays, coming home from the masjid, attending the weekend classes, we would stop at our special coffee shop, which was also a donut shop, and we'd have donuts and we'd have coffee and we'd talk about the week and the day and the classes, and we'd chat about life. And it was so exciting for me as a child that coffee meant a social time, a time of interaction. And really, I would say that my love for coffee really began at that moment. Abdullah al-Bahiri is a fascinating person because in so many ways he is one of the coffee innovators in the Emirates, someone who has dedicated himself to the craft of coffee, someone who has dedicated himself to perfecting how to brew this incredible beverage, but more than that, to understand the art of coffee, the technology of coffee, and to make coffee accessible to a wider audience. Coffee beyond the usual stuff that we have. We're not talking Nescafe or Folgers or Maxwell House here. We're not even talking Starbucks. We're talking about coffee as an art form. We're talking coffee as something that you should have and savor, not merely the fuel for your day, but something which brings brightness, light, and joy to your life. Abdullah al-Bahiri, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you, my dear brother. I would like to start by thanking the Ministry of Culture and Youth for this great opportunity to meet you and to talk about part of history which is really not clear for me. And giving me the opportunity to talk about the other part and why am I attached to this beverage in terms of the culture and how I always want to promote the rich culture we have in UAE and how it is attached to coffee, and it is beyond hospitality. We always promote it as hospitality, which is something good that we have in the Arab world, but it is beyond that.
Oh, I'm looking forward to hear about it, Abdullah. Abdullah, let me start off by asking you, When was that point in your life that you started developing a special relationship with coffee? Is there a point that you remember that it kind of dawned on you that your relationship with coffee is something quite different, something quite special?
To be honest, coffee was part of our daily life in UAE, especially. Every majlis will have the Arabic coffee. At home, our mothers, grandmothers, they always have coffee. It's always part of the conversation. They would teach us really early on how to, hold the dalla with your left, give the cup with your right. All
Amazing.
these manners and protocols that we have. We didn't understand why, but let's say the moment you're talking about was when I tried a small. I tried espresso in a small cafe and changed my mind regarding this beverage, which is espresso. To me, espresso used to be just concentrated coffee that will give me a punch, unpleasant punch. However, will give me the caffeine that I'm seeking. But I drank really sweet espresso without any sugar.
Allahu Akbar.
Yeah. And then just the questions came to my mind. How did they could brew espresso and taste so sweet without sugar? And that led to an amazing conversation, with a barista, and he explained what is specialty coffee, or how do they do that.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that, Abdullah, because in fact, I remember, when I got married, my wife and her family, they don't drink a lot of tea or coffee. Very unusual. Her family is from Bangladesh. She was born in London, grew up in Singapore. But after she married me, of course, she had to learn how to love coffee. And I remember it was in the first years of our marriage. And I would, every weekend I would take her to a different coffee shop and we'd have coffee, and she was very polite and loving about it. And she would have the coffee. But, Abdullah, she had the same experience as you. We were in a small coffee shop on Hackney Road in East London. And we were sitting outside, and the barista who we'd gotten to know over a few weeks of going to that shop came and said, "I would like you to try this new espresso roast, which I just got." And I remember the look on my wife's face. It reminds me exactly what you're describing, She had it and she stopped. And she didn't say anything, but I could see on her face like, oh, she tasted something she never tasted before. And then she drank it all. And I said, "How was it?" And she goes, "I've never tasted anything like it. Sweetness, chocolatey flavors, caramel." She was just
mouthful.
she was overwhelmed by it. And you're right, Abdullah. It's that moment that we realize that this thing is such this plant, this bean, and the craft associated with it is such a complex craft, isn't it? And I know that part of your journey took you to Australia as well, which of course is known around the world as a place of coffee craft. What happened after you had this experience with espresso? What road did you go down? How did you develop your skills? You're a champion barista, Abdullah, mashallah. How did you get to that point?
It all started by asking the question, how is it sweet? And then he started explaining to me, the barista. He's like, just higher quality beans. And then he started explaining the chain in a simple way, which is, they take care of the coffee from the tree to the cup. I'm like, from the tree? We never think of coffee as a fruit. It is a fruit.
Right, absolutely.
We always think of it in the last, step, or as a cup, or
yes,
as a beverage.
Yes.
So this just started, this information sparked many more questions. So I always related it to the palm trees and the varieties we have in UAE. It's a huge market here, and I always noticed that if we're getting dates from Mr. Ahmed farm, it would taste different than my grandfather farm, although because they are in two different areas, for example in Dubai or in Al Ain, and although it is the same variety, it would taste different because they took care of it in a different way.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
water matters, everything matters.
Yes, yes.
And then I can, I start relating it to coffee. Start reading more. I got my first tool. So I got introduced to that moment was in 2008, and then I got my first tool in 2014 or 13, and start from there. Just exploring all these areas: roasting, sorting, processing. Then I learned about something good, which is fair trade. Where the roasters or the cafe owners would buy the coffee bean directly from the farms and benefit the farmers, cutting the middleman who buys it cheap and sell it expensive. All of this, that community really, got my attention, and I was, obsessed by knowing more. And still, I can't call myself an expert. I never liked it when anyone, call me as an expert in coffee. I'm just specialized. I dedicated my, let's say, career now and life with this amazing craft, because
Yes.
I do love crafts.
Yeah, Abdullah, I'm going to come back to that because I think you have a very special story when it comes to craft, and I think it's a beautiful story that I hope you'll share with us. But you're absolutely right, Abdullah. I think the thing that really struck me was that once you begin to realize that this coffee is a fruit, and that, as you said, it needs to be cultivated, you start to understand not only the processes, but the people, isn't it? This industry is about people. It's about those honest farmers who work very hard under very difficult conditions, actually, to grow this plant. Often coffee plants, except in one or two unusual cases, will only fruit once a year. So all year people are preparing, isn't it? Farmers are preparing, their whole communities are relying on that one crop being just right. And when you think about all of the potential environmental issues, when you think about how poor international trade is around coffee, like think about all the coffee that is still not fair traded, let alone direct traded, that often farmers themselves are living in poverty while producing this beverage for the world. And I think what individuals like yourself are doing, and others who are promoting specialty coffee, particularly in the Khalij, particularly in the broader Muslim world, is actually educating. What you're doing is you're educating your audience, those who you're serving, and saying that this is not something easy, and that by paying a fair price, by investing in farmers, by paying that little bit extra for the cup that you drink, it's going all the way down the chain, right? And communities are being uplifted by it. And some of those communities, in the Islamic tradition that cultivated and grew coffee go back centuries. And one of the things that Abdullah, that always fascinated me was that if you were to ask, honestly, if I were to walk into here in the United States, everyone goes to Dunkin' Donuts, right? If I went into Dunkin' Donuts and I asked someone, where is the origin of coffee, what would they tell me? Italy, Colombia, Brazil. I've heard these answers. I think if you were to ask people, like, where does, maybe some people might say Ethiopia, right? But I think that what you and I and so many of us are doing is not only talking about the craft, but we're talking about the history. We know that coffee, God in his wisdom gave coffee to this place that we call on the map now Ethiopia, Abyssinia, Habasha. This place has been gifted with coffee, but coffee wasn't cultivated in Ethiopia first. It was cultivated in Arabia, in the Yemen. And really, it is in the Yemen that coffee becomes a cultivated beverage, because somewhere between the 9th and 13th or 14th centuries, the coffee plant made its way over the sea to the Yemen. And we know that the first proper cultivation of coffee happened at the hands of people who were deeply dedicated to the worship of God and the praising of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That these were people of faith, these were people of deep belief, these were people of spirituality who were cultivating coffee for a very particular purpose. As you said, we have that cup because we need the shot of caffeine. We need that shot of energy. And really, it was the spiritual communities, I should say, of the Yemen where coffee was really used, actually, almost used in a ritual type of way, right? To support prayer and to support adhkar and to support the remembrance of God in the gathering. So much so that initially, and I know you know this, Abdullah, initially they didn't even cook the bean. They used to just pick the bean and eat the bean. because the raw bean has so much caffeine in it. We know that because the as you roast it and process it, the caffeine declines. But eventually they realized, and this is so interesting because I want to come back to this thing about Arabic coffee, and I'd love to hear how your grandmothers and your mothers prepared that coffee, because the original coffee is not a gahwa al-bun, it's gahwa al-gishar. It was the boiling and the cooking of the coffee fruit, not the bean. That was the original coffee. And nowadays in specialty coffee circles, they call it qishar or they call it kaskara. And it's a very, people love it, because it has sometimes 4 times the caffeine that an espresso has, that if you just boil the fruit. But I know in the Arabic coffee culture, the fruit is still used as part of the traditions of preparing the coffee. And I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about that, Abdullah. You said that you grew up seeing those amazing traditions around you in your family. How is that coffee prepared? And how, I guess in a way, I'd love for us to think about how does it compare to the origins of coffee in the Yemen when it was first being brewed?
To be honest, one of the things that I put as a mission for me and my fellow friends who were judges in the first Arabian Gahwa competition.
Amazing.
Which was like high standards.
Wow.
It was last year in Abu Dhabi.
I wish I was there. I wish I was there.
Inshallah, next year, inshallah. So we got to know Arabic coffee from all of the Khalij region, with all of the roasts. Sorry, I'm taking you to the competition first.
No, please. I'd love to hear about the competition. I think this is fascinating.
But because we had judges from Saudi Arabia and UAE, and then Mr. Tim was from US, but he's an expert in all of the worldwide, championships. So we had like a high level scoring sheet. We were doing it right. And one of the things that we figured out, that Arabic coffee today in our region is not prepared as it should. Some people who came to compete are doing it the old traditional way, and it tastes way better than the ones served in hotels today. Amazing. Or in corporate offices. And there is a reason. So I start, going back and thinking, what happened to Arabic coffee in our region? So our grandfather used to buy the green bean, most probably from Yemen, because it was the closest. And they would roast it and directly grind it.
Amazing.
And then brew it and serve it. And they used to have amazing protocols of preparing the coffee and then serving the coffee. One of the amazing things that the first cup served in the majlis would always be drunk from the guy who prepared the dalla or the Arabic coffee, yeah?
Yes.
Just to make sure that telling everyone that, tastes good and there is nothing wrong with it. Just so everyone will be sure that it is good.
Right.
There's no poison.
There's quality control. Yeah. Quality control.
It's quality control, and in that era, so many everyone was on survival mood. You never know if it's poisoned or not.
It's true. It's true.
So it was like a guarantee that it tastes good and there is nothing wrong with it. And then the second one will be, for the guest. And then the third one here, where the guest, if he needs anything, literally anything, would ask. For example, if he didn't drink his cup, let's say the host, the owner of the majlis will ask him to, just drink your cup, and then whatever you'll ask is done. One of the stories that I heard, that even if someone from, if we have two tribes, for example, and someone from tribe A killed someone from tribe B,
right?
If they could reach, from tribe B to tribe A, and would do that, they won't drink their cup of coffee, and they ask, for forgiveness, that will happen over a cup of coffee. This is the rich culture and protocol that I'm trying to promote. How important is qahwa? It's beyond just hospitality. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, the ruler of Dubai, Prime Minister of UAE, mentioned in one of the national days celebrations that the first, let's say, initial meeting happened between Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan and Sheikh Rashid, to talk about even the union, was over a cup of coffee, qahwa, that Sheikh Mohammed himself, served them with it. Qahwa is part of our culture and our daily life. Going back to your question,
yes,
what happened to Arabic coffee now? That it got commercialized, so we started getting it from different origins, and the roasters we have in the region, I'm talking before specialty coffee, yeah. So between the 70s, 80s, 90s,
right
here,
right.
and I'm just talking about Arabic,
right?
Yeah,
The large commercial roasting operations.
Yeah, or even the small ones that we have in our neighborhoods.
Okay.
Usually they're from Blad Sham, and they're used to, roast for, they call it Turkish, or they call it Ibriq,
yes, that's right.
style.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So they would grind it very fine. On the other hand, when I go back to history, our grandfathers used to, use a metal grinder.
Yes, that's right.
We call it minhaz, yeah.
Yes, that's right.
that will only grind it coarse.
Yes.
So there is a huge difference. Only someone who knows the science of coffee, sorry, this is a little in-depth, nerdy.
No, let's be nerdy. I like it.
Yeah, you would know that whenever you grind it fine, it is easier to extract. And the method used in Arabic coffee, we boil the Arabic coffee. So boiling coffee will even, make it easier to extract. Imagine you have fine coffee ground and you're boiling it, so you're over extracting. Going back to the method that our grandfather used, it is coarse coffee, boiled, it tastes good and balanced. So one of the things that I'm trying to promote now, please, even if you're roasting with your local roaster, don't grind it fine as Turkish coffee or Ibriq. Let's grind it coarse, and it would taste way better.
That's right, because that coarse grind, Abdullah, is well suited to the boiling method of Arabic coffee. And it's interesting that you say that, because it's so true. So many times when we have the Ibriq coffee, if it's not prepared in expert hands, it tastes very bitter and over extracted and saturated with like the bitter flavors. And I think one of the reasons is that traditionally they never used to boil the Turkish coffee. They would warm it. They would warm it slowly until it came slowly to the boil. And just before it boiled, they take it away to ensure not the over extraction. But
100%.
I think what's happened is, like, in our fast culture, right? Where coffee in some ways requires us to slow down, like any craft, right? You have to slow down a little bit. Just like fast food and fast culture and fast coffee, it's never going to be optimal. I think when you slow it down and you take care in these things, that what you get at the end of it is not only a better tasting product, but something that you can actually extract and gain so much joy from. because, you know, I think to myself when I'm having my coffee this morning, which I prepared in a Hario V60. I'll tell you what I brewed in a second of the line. I want to hear what you brewed this morning as well. That you know, now that I'm drinking it, I really feel actually like I'm connected to the people who produce this coffee. You know, this coffee came from Colombia. It's from a farm in Colombia that direct trades with an American roaster that I like very much. They use a very interesting method. They ferment in mandarin oranges. It's a very unusual,
Yeah.
but I like the taste. You know, there's a kind of an interesting scent and taste around it. But, you know, also, Sayyid Abdullah, I whenever I drink coffee, and you know, we say Bismillah before we drink it, and and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And there's prayers for coffee, we know, in our tradition. I feel connected to the people who first cultivated this beverage. Like I, as a Muslim, like in terms of my spiritual lineage, every time I have coffee, I feel a great deal of pride. I'm like I'm holding something that was made popular the world over because of, you know, the culture and the faith that Allah gifted me to belong to. And I feel a great deal of pride, you know, I really do. I feel like very deeply connected to this thing that I believe is like a gift. You know, there's many gifts, but I do believe coffee was a gift to Islamic civilization, because in a way we took something so simple, it could have just been a drink, but we created literally an entire culture and way of being around it. I think that's the power. And when you're describing all these traditions and you're describing these methods, what you're telling me is that this is part of civilization. This is part of our culture. This is an essential, and so many things are revealed by that, isn't it? You know, and this idea of even like, you know, the way you said, like your grandfather would grind it coarse. It's also about teaching and learning. Like you go to teachers, I go to teachers. There's mashayikh of coffee that we have to go to and learn from. I really love that. I love that. I love that. I love the idea of coffee as high culture, right? Not just something as fast
Yeah,
food.
yeah, even supporting just going back to the farmers. We've seen this with Sheikh Zayed. You know, when we always hear these stories from our grandfathers. He used to support any farmer in UAE, and they would buy all of their, you know, whatever they produced, just to educate people, you know, to buy locally or to support the farmers, and they would use this money to develop
Mm.
those humble, let's say, farmers. Now the generation, let's say, their grandsons have an amazing, well-established farms with, you know, good brands, and they export even overseas, and this is amazing. Same thing, you know. Although coffee doesn't grow in UAE, I believe with the right technology we can do it. But again, it's growing in Saudi Arabia now and in Yemen, and I
Yes.
think we should always, you know, support the farmers over there.
Totally. And I think one of the real challenges of the line, I think this is an important point that you've raised. And thank you so much for raising it. I think one of the real issues has been, particularly for farmers in the Yemen, and my very dear friend Mukhtar Al Khanshali, you know, who was an incredible coffee innovator from Yemeni American, and you know, he's been doing remarkable work on working with farmers, particularly in the Yemen, to not only revive coffee as a specialty beverage, but to raise the quality of coffee. One of the things that he's told me is that what was happening was because the price point has become so low, particularly in the region around coffee, that farmers themselves were essentially tied to very low prices, and therefore they had no incentive to increase the quality of production. I think what people like you and Mukhtar and others are doing is that by raising the importance of coffee and the concerns around farmers who are from the region. These are our sisters and brothers. These are people connected to us in so many ways: humanity, faith, community, language, the Arab world, the Muslim world, that there's a special care that we need to take in ensuring that not only is their livelihood protected, but the culture they represent is protected, and they have the means really to develop their communities. I want to show a picture, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
Abdullah. And I'm gonna ask our hosts at the Ministry of Culture if you could just make me into a host for the event. I'll be able to share my screen, or give me permission to share my screen. But what I'd love to do is in a moment to show some pictures of some of the coffee fields in the Yemen, because I was amazed when I first actually saw these images of how incredibly verdant, green, the coffee terraces are, and the sophistication of those coffee terraces. Let me bring up this image, Sayyid Abdullah, and I'd love to share this with you. Okay, here we go. Can you see that, Abdullah?
Yes.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, and subhanallah, and brother, this takes us back to a point you talked about, which is,
yes,
no, it's not easy to take care of coffee trees. Not only you can harvest it once a year, but it only grows on high elevations,
yes,
which makes it harder. So people now, when they see this picture, they can imagine that it would take more manpower, let's say, and effort to than the other trees that grows on low level and low altitudes. So we always have to take in consideration that, all right, I'm gonna pay more for this amazing drink. I won't buy cheap Robusta, let's say, variety, which grows on any level. This is pure Arabica. Otherwise, they're amazing, subhanallah.
Isn't it amazing? This is a town. This is a coffee producing town in the Yemen. And I think one of the things that our listeners and our viewers should know is that, in these villages, and these are remote villages, they were the people and the crafts people of the Yemen were building skyscrapers. Before skyscrapers. In fact, the first tall buildings in the world, mass produced, are from the Yemen. And this is actually from a coffee producing village that my dear friend Mukhtar Al-Khanshali, the founder of Port of Mocha Coffee, he works with this particular village. And this is that building up on the hill, and look below. From that village, you can see the coffee. And I think what's so wonderful about this, and as you said, is that this was literally, the coffee was first grown. And I think this is an important thing to remember. Coffee was first grown not as a general beverage, but it was first cultivated so that the people of God, that the people who had dedicated their life to worshiping Allah and celebrating the Prophet Muhammad would drink from these beans and have the energy for Qiyamul Layl and for Tahajjud, and they would have energy and vigor to do the awrad and to remember Allah and His Messenger. And in fact, what's so interesting, Abdullah, is that something I learned from reading the coffee histories, particularly people like Ibn Abdul Ghaffar, who was one of the early historians of coffee from the Arabic Muslim tradition, is that in fact the celebration of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, was actually one of the key motivators for the production of coffee. That in the very early narrations of coffee, including a funny incident that I'd love to share with you, that very much the praise of the Prophet was associated with the drinking of coffee. That basically these people of God would sit together. They would actually brew the coffee together, and then they would pass around the coffee, and everyone would have would have a sip and gain the
Which
energy.
method, Abdurrahman?
So this is really interesting, Abdullah.
Yeah.
So initially, so as we were talking about before, thank you for bringing us back to that point. So initially, coffee was brewed from the fruit, the kisha.
All right.
So basically, the bean was discarded, and the fruit was itself raw boiled, dried and raw boiled to create almost a tea-like beverage. So you know what we call sometimes white coffee today in like Syria and in the Arab world, and what in outside of the Arabic world they call kaskara. But then probably at some point in the mid 1400s, you see the emergence of gahwa al-bun, the gahwa that is brown, or the gahwa of the bean. And what they would do is that they would take the green beans and they would roast them over an open fire. Exactly how you're talking, how your grandfather did it. You know, they would roast the beans over a fire until they became roasted, caramelized, released the aroma, and then they would pound them, just like your grandfather did. They would pound them and then they would boil them. And it was that boiled coffee that was then circulated amongst the people present in a particular company, and that's how they would drink it. And so it was known. Actually, there's detailed accounts of people sitting together, remembering Allah and His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the coffee would be passed around at some point in the evening to give people energy to engage in this. In this act. But I want to share this story with you because I think our listeners might find it really interesting as well. You know, I think we can joke, Abdullah. I think it's okay to joke and say there's never a good Muslim story unless there's at least a few fatwas, right? Every good Muslim story needs a fatwa or two. So this is the first time in 1511. Now look at the date, 1511. This is the first time that we have a recorded case of a controversy around coffee. So it is said that in 1511, at that time, Mecca al-Mukarramah, the holiest of cities, was under the control of the Mamluk dynasty, controlled from Cairo. So the Mamluk ruler was in Cairo, and the Mecca and Medina were under the control of the Mamluk kingdom. Shortly after this period, just a few years later, of course, the Ottoman Empire would come and would seize control of the Mamluks. In 1511, the leader of Mecca was a man known as Khair Bey. And Khair Bey was the ruler of Mecca, and he actually, history tells us, was not a very good administrator. He had a lot of problems. He was under pressure from a lot of people. You know, Mecca was a busy city, a pilgrimage city, a trade city still. And it so happened that we're told in the histories of coffee, Abdul Qadir tells us, Ibn Abdul Ghaffar tells us, that in 1511, Khair Bey was walking from the Holy Mosque to his home and passed by a group of Yemeni merchants, traders, who were reciting Salawat an-Nabi, and in fact, one of the accounts says that they were reciting the poetry of the Mawlid an-Nabi, and they were brewing and drinking this beverage. And so it is said that Khair Bey got very worried. And he said, "Oh my goodness, are they imbibing something that is like alcohol?" And so the Bey went to his council and he said, "I have seen this thing. What is it? I have never smelt this beverage before. I have never seen it before. I am worried." And of course, he was worried because any opportunity that brings people together, rulers of the time got a little worried that maybe some kind of sedition was happening and people were getting together. They had very little trust in their people. And so it was said that at this particular council of the leaders of Mecca, that two doctors who were of Persian origin were brought to brew and test the coffee. But the doctors weren't truthful. They were trying to win the favor of the Bey and trying to make it seem as if coffee was something intoxicating. And so it is said that when the Persian doctors brewed the coffee and drank the coffee, they pretended to fall down and swoon and say, "Oh, I've lost my state of mind. I do not know. I can't see clearly." And so in 1511, on the basis of this false testimony, there was a fatwa that was passed against coffee, that coffee was made illegal in Mecca. Khair Bey thought that, oh, this is a way that I can win the favor of the Mamluk Sultan who is in Cairo. And so he wrote the fatwa, tied it up, and sent it over to Cairo. When the fatwa got to Cairo and got to the court of the Sultan and he read it, he tore it up. Because by this time, coffee had already gotten to Cairo and people were drinking it in Qahira already. And it so happened that at that time the Mamluk ruler was so upset, and this is the really funny part of the story. It's a little bit macabre, but go with me here for a second, Abdullah. That basically the Mamluk ruler was so upset with Khair Bey that he called him back. He said, "You're out of a job. Come back to Cairo." And when he got back to Cairo, he was punished. He was tarred and feathered. He was no more. That's how badly he did. And then the two doctors who did false testimony, they were also told to leave Mecca. And on their way to Cairo, they were murdered by highway robbers. And the sheikh who signed the fatwa, erroneously and untruthfully, he also died very early. So I always have a joke when I give this presentation to my students or to people who are from other traditions than Islam. I said, you know what? This is God's beverage, right? Allah has put a blessing in this beverage. If you mess with coffee, God will mess with you.
I don't know if you know that they started brewing Arabic coffee in 1480. And this is one fact. The second fact, the coffee was forbidden even by the church.
Yes, that's
called
right.
It the demon drink.
Yes,
I don't know why they're hating. I think it's the energy. It's like the energy drinks. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it is the energy. I think it is the energy drinks. Let me show you something here, Abdullah. I want to. Here's the story about about the Christian connection. So in fact, because of trade, right? Particularly after the Ottoman Empire assumed control of the Yemen, they controlled the monopoly of coffee. Very interestingly enough, recently a Turkish barista told me that the quality of coffee, for example, in 1600 in Istanbul was probably better than the quality of most coffee in Istanbul today, because this coffee was coming straight from the Yemen. This was pure coffee. It was the best cultivated coffee. It was coming straight from the Yemen right into the great cities of Islam, Damascus and Aleppo and Baghdad and Mosul and Mecca and Medina and Cairo. I mean, if you can imagine, this is the beverage that unites this entire region. Everyone is drinking coffee. And of course, we know that the emergence of the coffee house, but because we are trading people, right? I mean, this is in our culture. I mean, in some ways, Islam is as a faith is a great promoter of interaction through trade, right? Through good trade, through good commerce, through building wealth for oneself and others. So, in fact, coffee had reached Venice quite early on, and then had traveled through Venice to places like Florence. And it was in those cities that the church said, oh my goodness, our good Christians are drinking what they called this Mohammedan beverage. See how interesting that coffee has been since very early times. Even those who hated it associated it with the connection to the people of the community of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. And so the bishops and the cardinals took the drink to the Pope, and they said, Pope, you must condemn this beverage, that you must not let Christians drink it. But the Pope was smart. The Pope knew that coffee was wealth. Coffee was a tradable resource. And so it is said that Pope Clement VIII, around 1600 actually said, well, let's bring it, you brew it for me, let me taste it, and then we'll make a decision about it. And it's said that Pope Clement VIII loved coffee so much that he said, this devil's drink is so delicious we should cheat the devil by baptizing it. And that's what he did. He baptized coffee, and that allowed for the Christian empire to begin to kind of engage in the coffee trade, which I think is remarkable. The other thing I want to show you, Abdullah, is a picture that I think you'll recognize from your readings of coffee. This is an old Ottoman era manuscript, and it is a picture of a coffee shop. Because I think there's two parts to it, and I really want to raise what you said earlier, Abdullah, because you said that coffee isn't just a craft, it isn't just hospitality, right? It's a culture. This is, I think, for those who are listening, this is important to understand. A culture is something that reflects all aspects of the human condition. It is not about what we eat and drink. It is how we eat and drink it. It is not about what we eat and drink. It's how we serve it. But it's also, Abdullah, as you know, it's not about only how we serve it, but the place in which we serve it. And I think one of the great actually innovations, the great steps forward in human history that came out of coffee was the gathering of people around a beverage. You know, up until coffee, you know, where would people gather? The markaz, the souk, the madrasa, the school, the masjid, you know? But the idea is that coffee, for the first time, created an institution called the coffee house. Yeah. You know, the as they would say in Farsi, the kahvehane, or in Turkish, right? The place, literally the house of coffee. You know, Darul Gahwa, right? Yes. And in this Darul Gahwa, what is going on? And this picture is so unique, and I want our viewers to see it. This kind of explains how complex the coffee house becomes. There is someone serving the coffee. There is the most important person in the coffee house, the Kavechi Basha, the Pasha of coffee, the barista. Yeah, you, Abdullah. Gawachi. This is you. This is the master barista who is brewing the cups for everyone, roasting and brewing. Here are the scholars discussing their sacred books. Here are the musicians who are entertaining. Here are the people who are playing chess and other games. Here are people who are talking and sharing stories. The coffee house became like your home outside the home, isn't it? The coffee house became the first and most important place where people of different social statuses would gather. In fact, Abdullah, this is fascinating when I learned it, and I'd like to share this with you. The European travelers who used to come to the Arabic and Muslim world, some of them were horrified and shocked that people of different classes, people who were elite, people who were workers, people who were mazdoor or working,
white collar, blue collar, they're all in one house.
They're all in one Darul Gahwa. Everyone is having coffee in the Darul Gahwa. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing.
Rahman, can I interrupt? Because
please,
this thought is, do you know which year we have this painting, this amazing painting is from?
I think it's probably from, my guess would be probably from the 1700s.
Yeah, and when I saw this, it's amazing because it shows you culture and what we're talking about. And I would like to thank again the Ministry of Culture because they're trying to do what we missed. Because our grandfather used to have like a Beit Gahwa, but we call them Majlis.
Majlis, of course.
Everyone used to be there, from Sheikh to let's say the farmers or I don't know, all levels of the society. Yeah, they used to go to Majlis to learn from there. And when I say culture, it is beyond hospitality.
Yes.
For example, they would teach the young kids to serve the elder to the younger. They would teach them to go to the guest first.
Yes.
These type of culture that we need to capture and promote as part of the Qahwa. You can see it all in this painting.
Yes, you can.
But for our UAE culture, thanks to the ministry or even the local authorities, they're now, you know, helping us to promote this culture around Qahwa.
Absolutely, Sidi. I'm so pleased you said that, because, you know, I think part of culture is also beauty, right? And I think a culture demonstrates beauty. And I love this old picture. This is a European picture of an etching of someone who viewed a coffee house and saw a coffee house in Istanbul, Constantinople. Look at how beautiful it is, Sayyid Abdullah. I mean, look at how beautiful these majalis are, right? That these are places of incredible attraction and beauty. And you know, this is an American scholar of the history of coffee, and his assertion is that the coffee house itself was in birth and development a very Muslim institution. And this is my kind of, you know, and what you're doing, Abdullah, may Allah give you great success in your work as in promoting coffee and this culture of coffee, that I feel like this is what we have to, this is such an essential part of who we are. These were spaces where young and old felt comfortable coming together. You know, today we talk about the intergenerational problem. You know, in the coffee house, the intergenerational problem, this is a meeting place for people. In fact, you know, one of the amazing aspects, and I know we only have about 6 minutes left before we have to conclude, is that—
No way.
Yeah, I know. The hour has gone by so fast, Abdullah. But one thing I was going to say is that, you know, in the history of coffee houses, and I think I have a picture here that I would love to share. This is a picture of a coffee house in London. And what's fascinating about the coffee houses of London is that they modeled themselves. You know, in London, coffee was the most popular beverage for over 150 years. In fact, it was so popular that some scholars say that for every 140 people in London, there was literally a coffee house. If you can imagine, for every 140 people equals one coffee house. It's remarkable, isn't it? And so one of the interesting things about the coffee culture in a place like London during the 1600s, 1700s was that these were the only places where people didn't get drunk. These were places where because of your coffee, the mind became alive. And there were coffee houses dedicated to philosophy, poetry, art, science, news, ideas, economics. And one of the very interesting rules of the London Coffee House, which I love, I think we should do this, that in the London Coffee House, there was no private conversation. That when anyone who was sitting, you could come and say, "Assalamu alaikum, I'm going to join you." And join. Exactly. It's like, you know, this is a place where everyone speaks to everyone. I love that idea. You know, one of the beautiful things I've noticed traveling in Turkey and other parts of the Muslim world is that when you're sitting in the Dar al-Qahwa, the Qahwa Khane, I always meet new people. I sit down, I have a qahwa. Sometimes, you know, people are smoking shisha or a nargile. Some people are having some sweets. And then, you know, you turn over to the next person next to you. Assalamu alaikum, how are you? Introduce yourself. And all of a sudden, friendship forms. We start talking about things. You know, there's this beautiful sense of you know, informality, right? In a formal place, but a sense of informality between us, that we can speak to one another, we can engage with one another. And I think it's something, especially in these pandemic times that we're living in, we've become so atomized, right? So closed. And one of the things that we yearn for is connection. And I think there's something really beautiful about connection, isn't there? There's something really beautiful about the social and the community of coffee, shall we say.
It's amazing, Abdurrahman. And if you'll allow me, I would like to, ask all of the cafe owners who are attending today, or even when they'll see this video later, let's take a promise and, you know, help in promoting the Arabic Qahwa and promoting what you just said, to make our place or cafes a place where we can, you know, promote our culture and meet new people and make it original by that. It's not about the machines. It's not about the coffee. It's not about how expensive it is. It's about that. Create your own community and culture.
It's sohba, isn't it? Sohba.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, like the old, and you know, one of our questions that we had from the audience was, is there a culture and literature around coffee? And of course there is. The Turks, the Yemenis, they have amazing poetry about coffee. In the Yemen, actually, tea became popular, particularly in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And you know, different mashayikh wrote qasidas in honor of tea, and some wrote qasidas in honor of coffee, and they would say the supremacy of coffee over tea and the supremacy of tea over coffee. And then some of the mashayikh wrote how coffee and tea are friends and they walk hand in hand with each other. But there's a beautiful Turkish poem, and we can close on this, Sayyid Abdullah. There's a beautiful Turkish poem about that you know that we don't drink coffee for coffee, right? We drink coffee and we don't put sugar in our coffee because the coffee is just an excuse. Is just an excuse for us to have good sohbat. Is to have good sohbah. That, you know, the coffee is the good cup of coffee. Yes, well made, like you said, beautiful. Smells aromatic, of course, but it's an excuse, isn't it? For people to get together in good company. And part of that good company, of course, is prayer. Ibn Abdul Ghaffar talks about this idea of marqaha, the idea that you know, this feeling of well-being and uplifting of the soul. But I want to share this with you, Sayyid Abdullah, and I'm sure you've seen this before. This is from one of the great scholars of the Yemen, Habib Imam Ahmad bin Muhammad al-Mahdar, may Allah be pleased with him. And this is known as the Fatiha al-Saghir. There are also Fatiha al-Kabir. But this is one of the prayers that is recited in the Yemen to this day before coffee is drunk. And you know, what's beautiful about this is that, and you know, of course, Arabic, Sayyidi, much better than I do, but look at how beautiful it is. You praise the scholars of coffee, that we praise the spiritual people, the men and the women, right? And then we ask that Allah increase us in all kinds of goodness, and that we make good intention by drinking coffee. And of course, at the end, we invoke the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And we invoke the grandfather of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, right? And we invoke the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we ask that Allah send blessings on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I think this is so beautiful, isn't it, Abdullah? And this takes what you were saying to its logical conclusion, that for us, coffee isn't a culture; it's become part of our belief, right? That by creating this culture of coffee, it's actually exemplifying our very belief, isn't it? It's exemplifying who we are as spiritual people. And I think it's so important on this occasion of the Mawlid Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that in this time when we are calling to mind the beautiful character of the Prophet, the hospitality of the Prophet, the generosity of Prophet, the care that the Prophet had for the old elders, the care that the Prophet had for the young, the way he brought young and old together, the way he brought peace between people, as you described, over meals and over his blessed majlis, that this is a time for us to think, as you said, about coffee and the coffee house through the lens of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. And this is really kind of like a wonderful way, I think, for us to think about the Prophet and think about the Prophet's character. Abdullah, this went by too fast.
It is. I can't believe that 1 hour passed.
It's amazing. And I know that you are not just dedicated to coffee, that you are dedicated to other crafts like leather and I mean, you're bringing beauty into the world. And I just want to say it's such a pleasure to have met you through this. I hope we continue to keep in touch. And I look forward that when this pandemic has subsided somewhat and we are able to travel, that inshallah I'll be able to come and visit you, and we'll share a cup of the Muhammadan bean together.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Muhammad. Jazakallah khair, Abdullah. And I want to once again thank our friends and sponsors at the UAE Ministry of Culture and Youth. I know the minister was also listening in on today's conversation, so very welcome. I hope we were able to share something with you. You have in your midst people like Abdullah who can continue this work of promoting the culture and the spirituality of coffee. A final note from our friends at the Ministry of Culture and Youth: please look forward to other programs that are happening this week. On YouTube, in the chat section, you'll see a link to the programs that are happening between today and Thursday, all in honor of the Maulid Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, this celebration of the Prophet Muhammad. And my final word is that we make dua. And that all of us who are listening, whatever background we come from, will be people of hospitality and generosity, and that we will have the best of the character of the Prophet Muhammad, and that in this time of conflict, in this time of fracture, in this time of fault lines, that we, through our work, whether it's in coffee or elsewhere, will be sources of peace and be able to bring people together. God knows that this is a time for people of mercy and generosity and hospitality. And may we continue to be blessed with the ability to try and do exactly that. Thank you very much again, Abdullah. Jazakallahu khair. Thank you to our friends at the Ministry of Culture. And we're signing off.
وزارة الثقافة والشباب مشكورين.
Jazakallah khair. Take care, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.